Hey guys, what is up? My name is David, and today we're going to be getting into Air Canada's Q2 results, my thoughts on them, and where I see Air Canada going in the future. Now, just to recap, I've made two other videos on Air Canada, and in those videos I talked about why it was a really good investment, especially compared to other airlines in the US. And just to recap some of those ideas, I said that Air Canada had a much better management team. They'd reduced a lot of their expenses. They were able to convert um, passenger planes into cargo carrying planes. I talked about how much of an advantage that can be in the future in generating revenue. And then I also detailed the fact that they're trading at a cheaper valuation than all these US airlines in terms of um, their metrics, their valuation metrics. They have a pretty solid balance sheet overall. They're able to raise a lot of cash because they have a monopoly, or a duopoly, rather, in Canada with WestJet. And lastly, of course, the Canadian government kind of relies on Air Canada to an extent to produce some of its GDP. I think Air Canada actually referenced that in their earnings report. They said they produced around 2% of Canada's GDP, which might not sound like a lot. It's quite a bit, especially for a country of Canada's size. They're pretty big. To have any company produce 2% of GDP is pretty significant. So we wouldn't want to see them go away. Um, Last thing, they really don't do many share buybacks. The US airlines are very heavy on that. That's how most people who invest in airlines got their returns, was they bought back shares. Air Canada hasn't really done that much. They've been pretty good because they understand that the airline business is very cyclical. So without further ado, let's get into the actual report. Getting into it, um, I have the screen recording, the transcript of the earnings call. So I'll be kind of going over and referencing things in the transcript mainly. So feel free to follow along with me. And I'll be kind of expanding onto some of the things said in the transcript to give you guys some more insight. So, first thing they say is that they can confirm the devastating and unprecedented effects of COVID-19. Not a surprise. There was a big sell-off in Air Canada stock right before earnings because people were very fearful of the results, and they had good reason to be. Air Canada's results were not very great this quarter, but as I've said in previous videos, that should be expected, that this year is going to be very off for a lot of airlines, and that we shouldn't really expect to see recoveries within the next year, probably the next 3 to 5 years. And they said, we recorded second quarter negative EBITDA of $832 million and an operating loss of $1.55 billion. That is a very big loss. To put that into perspective, last quarter, they lost around $450 million, an operating loss of 450. So they've more than tripled their losses this quarter, and this is way below what analysts had been expecting. It's way below what I've been expecting as well. I really thought that their cargo business and some of their other operations would have, or at least decreases in expenses would have offset that loss. Clearly not. But still, even with that loss, they are going to be fine in terms of liquidity. Not really concerned. But it is worse than I expected. I think this does increase a little bit of the risk with Air Canada, depending on what's going to happen now with the second wave. Um, that being said, they said operating revenue declined 89% over the second quarter for 2019, but they had strong growth in cargo revenues, which is what I pretty much stated before, that their cargo business, they often ship medical supplies. So what they were able to do, and no US airline can do this, by the way, they were able to convert their passenger planes into cargo planes, and they were able to ship medical supplies in and out of Canada and get paid for it. So this is a very good sign, the fact that they actually had a beat on revenues and they missed earnings by a lot. So the revenues came in at around $550 million ish, and they were expected to have around 400 million. So pretty good beat. A lot of that had to do with cargo, which is unexpected by many analysts. It was expected here on this channel though. and they pretty much just said that Canada had some very strict um, provincial restrictions, and they had pretty much been the hardest hit in the world, is what they are trying to say. That Canada really hasn't provided much of any benefits at all towards Air Canada, which they really don't need. I mean, they talk about it here like they need it, and that Canada was just they needed to toss them a life preserver. Air Canada's fine. It'll take them a while to recover, but I think that even if the Canadian government did intervene, I think it would not overall be very beneficial in their recovery. They'd need to pay it off eventually, and we'll see what happens with U.S. airlines too, because they were helped much more than Canadian Airlines overall. So they said revenue from passengers declined more than 96% compared to a year ago. That is insane. Like, revenues declining 96%. So it's pretty much commercial airlines has been shut down in Canada. And they pretty much just reinstate the fact that they tried to do everything they can to manage this challenging time. Then they go and highlight the fact they've raised $5.5 billion in new equity, debt, and aircraft financings. So it provides them with around $9 billion of liquidity as of June 30th. Not concerned. I mean, they're overall it's not good for shareholders because I think Air Canada stock has been a little bit diluted from that. But there's no need to worry about Air Canada going bankrupt. Now the only concern is how fast can they actually recover from this. And then they also say that they've taken decisive action to cut spending, preserve cash, and they pretty much made a huge reduction of their fixed costs, $1.3 billion, and the retirement of 79 aircrafts, and a lot of indefinite suspensions of certain routes and closures, and a reduction in their seat capacity as well. So a lot of these things, they're downsizing, they're cutting expenses, they're probably going to generate, like, when they reopen, I'd say a third of the revenue they were generating before. But at the same time, that's better than taking losses. They might make a third of their revenue, um, but it will be very easy for Air Canada to scale back up to where they were because the demand's still there for airlines. There is going to be, within the next year, their revenues will be able to increase. There is a huge demand for airlines in Canada. And then they also have the addition of cargo revenues, which will kind of boost up their overall revenues as well. The CFO pretty much says, in terms of cash burn, that they had cash burn of around $19 million per day in second quarter 2020, which is around 1.7 billion. Um, and then it was in line with their expectations, by the way. And then looking ahead, they expect to lose around 15 million to 17 million a day in third quarter, which is quite a bit. I mean, that's that's a lot of money, and that would pretty much put them at a net loss that it's better than this quarter, but worse than in Q1. So somewhere in between, not great, but still better than Q2, and a lot more certain than US Airlines. That much I can definitely tell you. Um, then they proceed to highlight, this was I found very funny. Air Canada generates around 50 billion in total economic output in Canada, which represents 2% of GDP. Um, so this is pretty much them still kind of begging Canada to help them out a little bit. I'm not so concerned about that. It is a little bit concerning though that they mention in their report, but you'll see later on that they highlight they're in the workings of something with the Canadian government to help them out. So the first question that was asked is one that I really had as well. That is that they pegged a 3-year timeline for them recovering. Is that really going to be the same? Has it changed? And how long do they think the airline industry itself is going to recover? Then the CEO, Callan Rovinescu, pretty much says it's a very important question. And he says they expected it to be 3 years. Then the IATA said that they consider it to be around 4 years. They've been saying, and this is where Callan kind of changes what he said. He says minimum 3 years, but it could be longer than 3 years. So now we have this estimation pretty much saying it's minimum 3 years. It's not. It's going to be more than 3 years. They don't want to call a time frame, but they're going to do everything in their power to get it within 3 years. I'd say that's pretty fair. I think some investors were expecting a really fast recovery. I think that was pretty crazy to expect anything less than 3 years. But we'll see where it goes. I think anywhere between 3 and 5 years is more than reasonable for this company to recover. Overall, my thoughts are that Air Canada stock at the current price is reflecting a lot of pessimism, and I think it's kind of justifiable. If you want to add to your Air Canada position, I think now is a good time to do so. Definitely not selling out of Air Canada. I think this is the worst of the storm for this company, but I might consider selling out of Air Canada if it spikes up to around $23-ish. And I'll add more if it continues to drop, because I think 15 is now fair, and anything below 15 is a good buy. That's going to wrap up my video for today on Air Canada. If you guys enjoyed, please feel free to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this channel for more stock analysis videos. I make videos on Canadian and US stocks, so be sure to check out the ones I have made, and there will be a lot more to come. Also, let me know down in the comments what stocks you're buying. Are you buying Air Canada? Are you buying another airline stock? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll be sure to get back to each and every one of you. With that, please be sure to do your due diligence and invest intelligently.